So next on our agenda is the presentation of our Graduate Student Research Award. Each year we give out an award. We've been doing this since 2016. And of course, the spirit of the CESU is to involve students in research projects. And so get them involved early. And in general, it has a very large impact on students and their future, their career projectus. So this year, we received several nominations, but our winner is Michelle Weschler from the University of Wyoming. And so Michelle worked on insects and wind turbines, and she'll give us a small presentation on what she learned and the importance there. But first, we'll hear from her nominator, Lusha Tronstad at the University of Wyoming. Dr. Tronstad, are you there?
I am.
Excellent, we can hear you.
Great. That's the first thing. And let's see, I should be sharing my screen and hopefully this will work. There, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for awarding a very deserving student, Michelle. So I get the honor of introducing her today. So she earned her Master of Science at the University of Wyoming under me, and she is currently job hunting. I just thought I'd mention this if anyone has any openings and looking for an excellent candidate. Her thesis was very unique, investigating wind energy in insects, reviewing the state of knowledge and identifying potential interactions. And this was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funded project through the CESU. There we go. Okay, so Michelle had a one-of-a-kind thesis, I have to say. We do some work on wind energy and insects in our lab. We've done a couple of studies that are out there, and a couple other people have done some others, but really there's nothing known. And so the only thing that we do know is that earthworms are less abundant by wind turbines compared to farther away. We know that the base color of turbines can attract insects, and we know that insects are lost at turbines due to striking blades. But Michelle's work brought together a diverse literature to assess interactions, because there really aren't many studies directly addressing this. Insects can have large effects on wind energy, as she's going to tell you. And in addition to doing a literature review, she was also able to get out there and collect field data through another BLM agreement with the CSU. Her manuscript is in review right now. So a little bit about Michelle. She was born and raised in Florida, and she came west to do her MS, and she likes winter. Michelle is very knowledgeable about pollinators, and I've been really impressed by her drive, attention to detail, and ability to learn new skills. And she is always amazing me at how much she knows about wind energy and insects. I ask her a question, and she always has the answer. And anyway, she is a great person, and she's very deserving of the award. So thank you.
Thank you, Lusha. Michelle, are you available?
I'm here. Hello.
Excellent. Greetings, Michelle. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. I will go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully that works. Everyone can see that okay?
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. Okay, so I will try to be as quick as possible, but the one thing about my thesis is that it was very long, so I'll try to get everything I can in. First, I just wanted to thank Lusha for the introduction. Lush has been an amazing advisor to me throughout my master's and continuing on from that. And I also want to thank everybody involved in GPCESU for their involvement and for the award. I'm incredibly honored to have received it. I'm sure there were many, many deserving students who were up for this award. But for me, it is always a little bit satisfying to get some acknowledgement for the little guys, by which I, of course, mean insects. So I will talk to you a little bit about what I learned through doing my thesis. So like I said, the thesis was on insects and wind energy. And if you don't know a lot about insects, you probably do know that they provide some important ecosystem services. You may know probably about their influence on pollination, how about 80% of native plants are animal pollinated, and a large chunk of that is facilitated by insects. But insects also do things like nutrient cycling, so moving things like nitrogen, phosphorus through the soil for plants to use. They're forage for birds and bats. They help with decomposition. And they can also work as pest control, which is huge for agriculture. And so insects provide, keep our ecosystem running. And this also has huge monetary value. In the US, and this is a kind of an older study, but it was valued that insects contribute $57 billion a year economically through their ecosystem services. And this number has probably only increased since that study came out. Unfortunately, we also know that insects are declining. So there's a couple of studies I have here that show that certain insects, certain taxa, including pollinators, are on the decline for various reasons, including climate change, pesticide use, habitat fragmentation, invasive species introductions, things like that. And we also know on the flip side that wind energy is rising at a very rapid rate. So just this past year, globally, they reached the milestone of having 1 terawatt of global capacity installed in wind energy. And it's only projected to keep rising. The number and power of turbines, as well as their size, is projected to continue rising. I believe they said the next terawatt of energy would be reached within the next decade. So we're going to see more and more turbines and more things powered by wind energy. And like Lusha said, we know that insects are striking turbines. We know this because we have physical evidence. You can see here is a close-up of a wind turbine blade. And that a lot of that debris you see on there is dead insects, which die by striking the turbine blades. This is not great for the insects, but it's also not great for the turbines. Debris on turbine blades from insects and other things can actually very significantly affect the power output of turbines. You can see here, this is a difference of over 100 kilowatts, and this is a study from over 20 years ago. So as turbines increase in size and increase in power, this difference between rough and clean blades was only going to get more significant. So it's important to understand these interactions, not only for the insect's sake, but for power generation as well. And like Lusha said as well, we don't know a lot about insects and wind turbines. This I just checked yesterday on the Tethys knowledge base, which is from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. It's a they gather information about wind energy resources. So you can see there's almost 2,000 sources that they've gathered on land-based wind, which is what my thesis focused on. Over 1,000 of those was about birds. Over 600 was about bats, and a whopping 10 sources talked about invertebrates. We're finally in the double digits, so that's exciting. But yeah, so there's not a lot of information out there yet. It's not being heavily studied, and we're only just starting to realize the importance of this. So that's, like Lusha said, it's a pretty unique thesis, and that's why it was a lot of fun to actually learn about. So my thesis has a couple of parts. First, I wanted to understand how turbines influence the habitats that they're in. abiotic and biotic factors. I wanted to understand how those effects influence or attract insects, because there's the hypothesis that insects are actually attracted to turbines, which is exacerbating the issue of them being killed, dying through striking turbines. And then finally, we wanted to kind of understand these impacts and look at ways to potentially mitigate them. So I cover a couple of topics in my thesis about the abiotic environment and how it's affected by turbines, and then how that affects insects. One of the big ones is temperature. So turbines mix the air in the atmosphere, and it can result in a warming effect at night, surface level temperatures, and a cooling effect during the day because it is mixing those air layers. And this can vary very significantly based on the topography, the turbulence, the environment the turbines are in. And turbines themselves also are warmer than the ambient temperature, about 2 degrees Celsius, depending on where you are. And all of this can impact insects. So if you know anything about insects, you know that they are very reliant on thermoregulation. They need sources of warmth to fly, to breed, to do pretty much anything productive. So they're always looking for sources of warmth, and turbines actually tend to be a pretty good one. There's evidence that we found that flies will bask or rest on turbine towers despite the predation risk from things like bats and birds. An invasive species of lady beetle, I believe in Poland, was found using turbine towers to overwinter, which could be pretty significant if we think about turbines in relation to being close to agriculture. The refuge of invasive species on them could be a pretty significant factor. Obviously, if turbines are making the air around wind energy facilities warmer at night, that would attract more insects to that area. And then variations in surface temperature, cool and warm, could attract specific insects such as temperature generalists, who can withstand those sort of changes in temperature throughout the day because of turbines. Obviously, wind is a pretty significant factor affected by turbines. There is increased turbulence downwind of turbines that can actually affect the functioning of turbines placed downwind. So it's a pretty significant abiotic factor to consider. Wind speed is significantly reduced at hub height, so at the very top of the turbine, because turbines are, trying to extract as much energy from the wind as possible. The wind directly behind it is significantly reduced in speed. And then turbines are increasingly being installed in sites with lower average wind speeds in the US as they continue to pop up everywhere, which could be significant for insects because we know that insects tend to fly more at lower wind speeds. And insect flight is a huge part of what I talk about in my theses. Obviously, the most vulnerable species are going to be ones that are flying around and can actually reach turbine blades. And there's a couple of aspects of insect flight that we think are the most, put insects at the most vulnerability. And this includes migration. So a lot of insects, including, you might know of the monarch butterfly migration, they migrate at very high altitudes across the country using wind and wind speeds to go super far. And that can put them directly in the path of turbines, both at height and because they're using those wind currents. Swarming, insects have been found swarming around the tops of turbines, probably because they're a pretty good visual marker, which I'll get into in a sec. And that puts them directly at, directly at blade height where they could interact with the blades. And then mating, insects partake in a mating called hill topping. So they'll use the tops of hills to meet and mate, and that could put them in danger because a lot of times wind energy is built on hilltops to sort of get as high as possible and get that wind energy. So all of these behaviors could put some insects at greater risk. So light, I also talk about light of turbines and the visual perception of turbines by insects. Turbines have to be lit at night by law, FAA regulation, and they can have any number of bright red LED lights, flashing lights, so that they can be seen at night. This is a little bit, this is something that's being developed. There's air detection lighting systems, which only turn on these lights when absolutely necessary. But it is something to consider. A lot of insects exhibit what's called positive phototaxis. So they head towards light. Think of moths being attracted to light. And some insects even have shown a specific attraction to red LED lighting, which is what you'd find on top of turbines. It also doesn't help that turbines lighting is usually the only ambient artificial light in an area, since turbines, at least especially in the US, are not usually very close to other sources of ambient light. So this could attract more insects than it otherwise would. And another thing about insect vision and the perception of turbines is most turbines are tall, white, or light gray in color. They're very high contrast with the environment, and their color is very reflective. So there's actually a couple of papers, including one from a former member of the Tronstad lab, Madison Crawford, that showed that insects were more attracted to white turbine mimics than other potential colors. So, like I said, the shape of them, their tall, sort of thin nature, their size, and their color all sort of act as a visual markings that insects might be using to gather around in the horizon. And then I also talk a little bit about sound. Turbines produce sounds in many frequencies: high frequency, low frequency, and also infrasound, which is below the level of human hearing, but is usually felt as in the form of vibrations. And those can persist downwind in the ground. And infrasound actually seems to potentially have a lot of impacts on insects. There's a lot going on in this slide, but basically we think that it could potentially mask insect communication, because insects use vibrations to communicate a lot of time. So think about the example of honeybees using the waggle dance. That's a form of them using vibrations to communicate, which could be masked by the frequencies of turbine vibrations. And it can also disturb insects. They do a lot of stuff underground. It can cause stress. It can delay development. It could lead to fewer offspring. So this is an aspect that I'm really intrigued about. And I think that a lot of work could be potentially done looking at sound and how and vibrations and how they affect insects. So like Lusha said, and like I said before, we didn't want to just communicate this information. We also wanted to sort of give our own information and interpret and give some strategies. So we're able to do some field work. We did a case study where we looked at insect abundance and diversity near and at locations farther away from turbines. We were able to look at abundance and diversity directly within a operational wind facility and see where we found the most insects. And some of that information is in my thesis, and there's a lot of data that we got that is still being written up. So it's pretty exciting continuation of this work. I also did a risk assessment where I overlaid species distribution models for imperiled species like the regal fritillary here with maps from NREL that look at the potential for wind development based on regulations in different areas to kind of show where specific insects of interest might be at risk. And this is kind of just an idea for like a tool that people could use to jumpstart the talk about insect conservation with regards to wind energy. So there's a lot more actually packed into my thesis, but we have, these conclusions, color, and the microclimate effects that may attract insects to turbines. I made a huge table that sort of looked at each different order and kind of identified which ones might be most at risk based on their behaviors and the literature. So we found some evidence for Lepidoptera, butterflies, beetles, flies, and true bugs that might be the most at risk for collisions. And obviously, like, there's turbines all over the world, all over the country, so there's likely pretty large variations in the species and number of insects affected. And we think that standardized monitoring before and after development should be used to inform future siting. And like I said, sound and vibrations could be a pretty interesting thing to continue investigating. And I also wanted to highlight the knowledge gaps, like any good literature review should. So we want to know what taxa are killed by wind turbines, how this differs by facility. And the big question is this actually influencing population dynamics or overall biodiversity? And that would be a good first step in understanding what exactly needs to be done in terms of conservation efforts. Are insects nesting within or otherwise using wind energy facilities? We know they might be overwintering or basking there, but what else is going on? And how are turbines affecting things like plants? Part of our fieldwork was looking at seed set and how plants might be affected by vibrations, how it might lead to increased selfing. And that manuscript is in progress. So we're still learning a lot. Then how do turbines influence super small scale microhabitats that insects are actually navigating? So like the tops of flowers, leaves, those really like small habitats that we might not think about compared to the larger picture. And then could mitigation strategies that are used for bats and birds also mitigate insect fatalities? So we have studies that show painting a turbine blade reduces predatory bird strikes, or that changing cut-in times could lower fatalities. And I think it'd be interesting to start studying if this also affects insect fatalities as well, these mitigation strategies. And then, like, this kind of goes into the microhabitat thing, but can turbines provide refuge for some insects? I think that's an important question to ask as well as we continue to, grow this infrastructure throughout the country. So that's the basis. There's a lot. If anybody is interested in reading the entire thesis, like I said, it is in review, but I'm happy to share or talk about my work more with anyone who's interested. A lot of people helped me with this, so thank you to all of them. Thank you to U.S. Fish and Wildlife for funding the thesis, and also the BLM for funding the fieldwork that we did. And thank you to everyone here, of course, for the award and for listening to my spiel. I appreciate it so much.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Lusha, for nominating her. That's one of the keys here, is getting nominated, getting your advisor to nominate you. That's really important. Any questions for Michelle? Very, very interesting stuff. Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, for your presentation. Very interesting, and congratulations on the award. Two things. One, it might seem too far away, but I work with another one of our federal partners is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they're tasked with installing wind farms in coastal areas. And I know some of their environmental science and studies program lead. They may be interested in this presentation. So if it's okay with you and Paul, if you're going to have a recording of this, maybe I can share that with those guys, because I think this kind of work would be pretty interesting for some of the work that they're doing. Plus, it's cutting edge. You said there's not much going on. The other question I had was related to, have you looked at low frequency noise? I know you mentioned the distribution of earthworms and maybe other terrestrial critters may be impacted by subsonic low frequency noise, and I think that's maybe an area of interest for some folks too, in terms of looking at the impacts of turbines. So I didn't know if you looked at that or not, but just a curiosity of mine.
Yeah, We were not able to. It turns out that equipment that collects vibration information is very expensive. And we kind of wanted to collect vibration information, but we weren't able to, like actual measurements. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting avenue of future research, just because we know so much insect activity happens underground. And there is evidence that anthropogenic noise and anthropogenic vibrations can, like I said, induce stress, reduce brood sizes. There was that earthworm study which showed that decreased abundance of earthworms closer to turbines, which they think is because of vibrations. And there is some also evidence of effects on vertebrates. There was a study done on badgers, geese. So I think there's a lot of legs there in terms of future research. And I think it'd be, I think it would be pretty significant to understand how those infrasound is affecting insects.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Michelle, and congratulations again. We did just get t-shirts printed for the GPCSU, and so one of these is on its way to you, but they just came in tomorrow. It won't be this wrinkled, I don't think, but it is what it is.
I am excited. I love the hat. I love the plaque. So I'm excited for the t-shirt. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And if you're comfortable, it might be a good idea to put your email in the chat so that people that may have job postings available might be able to find you a little easier. So
yeah, absolutely. If anybody is hiring, I'm looking for work. So I will put that in there. Thank you.
Awesome.